We know most of what we know about vaudeville because of the existence of Variety. Variety was the first to actually review shows and talk about what was being performed on the stages.
Welcome to Daily Variety, your daily dose of news and analysis for entertainment industry insiders. It's December 16th, 1905. I'm your host, Cynthia Littleton. I am co-editor-in-chief of Variety alongside Ramin Satuda. I'm in LA, he's in New York, and Variety has reporters around the world covering the business of entertainment. On today's episode, as teased in that opening, we'll go back in time to 1905. Variety is marking its 120th anniversary. 120. We'll hear all about the business of vaudeville and variety show entertainment, which was the focus of the marketplace when we began. We'll hear from David Mono, professor of American Social and Cultural History at Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario. He's an expert on the vaudeville business. And we'll hear from author and screenwriter Peter Rader about how new technology in the form of the gramophone and one very savvy French actress created the star system that now rules our world. But before we get to that, here are a few facts and headlines about Variety that you need to know. Our first issue hit New York's newsstands on December 16th, 1905. As we promised on our front cover, Variety in those days covered vaudeville, circuses, parks, burlesque, fairs, and more. The booking of entertainment for summer parks and fairs, that was a big beat. Each issue of Variety cost 5 cents, $2 for a year's subscription, $3 for foreign subscribers. On the masthead, we declared, a variety paper for variety people. Variety was published on Saturdays out of the Knickerbocker Theater building in Manhattan at 38th and Broadway. The first issue had a long and somewhat snarky essay about the vaudeville business from famous theater critic Acton Davies. In those days, Variety ran information on new acts, we ran reviews, and we ran a lot of ads for new acts. Within 10 years, Variety would be such a trusted institution that many vaudeville artists declared Variety in New York to be their permanent address. They'd get mail and packages sent there, we'd hold it for them, and they'd pick it up when they got back into town. Variety was founded by Sime Silverman. He was a journalist from upstate New York who wrote about entertainment and vaudeville for numerous New York newspapers. He was working for the Morning Telegraph when he got fired after panning a vaudeville show. The theater pulled its advertising and he got the boot. He got mad, he got inspired, and he borrowed $2,500 from his father-in-law to launch Variety. As you'll hear from Professor David Mono in a moment, variety was a catch-all term to describe a type of stage show with a multitude of acts. Vaudeville was a specific form of variety show, but the concept of the variety show goes back to the mid-1800s. So the word variety, in all of its vitastic glory, was a spot-on choice for the name of Silverman's paper. Silverman ran Variety with a firm hand out of Midtown offices on 46th Street in New York for nearly 30 years. He died on September 22, 1933, in Los Angeles. He was out there because just a few weeks earlier we launched the Daily Variety edition, published out of Hollywood, on September 6, 1933. If all of this history is as interesting to you as it is to me, please go find our precious December 10th print edition. It has a very big section that celebrates Variety's 120th anniversary by looking at the history of the business that we cover. It's a terrific issue, which also has the Netflix Warner Brothers Paramount Brawl on the cover. You can, of course, also find it online at Variety.com. My colleague Dan Dobrowski built out a nifty Variety 120 digital hub on Variety.com. It also has a slanguage dictionary that explains the zany words that we made up in a way that really helped knit the community together. As Syme said, a variety paper for variety people. And now we turn to a conversation with Professor David Mono. He's the author of Vaudeville and the Making of Modern Entertainment, 1890 to 1925. He has so much insight for us about what the entertainment marketplace was like when Variety was born. Professor David Mono, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you for having me here.
I went looking for somebody who was an expert on the business of vaudeville, and your book, Vaudeville and the Making of Modern Entertainment, popped up. I was so excited that you said yes very quickly. As we celebrate Variety's 120th anniversary, I thought it would be instructive to talk about what was the entertainment marketplace like at that time, particularly in New York, where we were born. And of course, if you look through our first bunch of issues, you can just see the coalescing of this entertainment infrastructure, so much of it around New York. Professor, can you sketch the scene if somebody had a dime or two in their pocket and they wanted to go out and have a show and they happened to live in New York or Boston or a big city where you could find that? What kind of a marketplace was it in 1905?
It's a transforming one. So there's a fairly wide variety of new entertainments, and there are lingering older entertainments. You could still go out to see a melodrama. If you weren't in New York, possibly go out to see a tent show or a traveling show. If you had a dime, you'd probably end up going to a pretty cheap vaudeville theater. You wouldn't get into the legitimate in terms of the conventional theater. Or you could go to a burlesque. You wanted to see a burlesque show, or you could go out and get a drink in a saloon. But vaudeville was certainly the growing entertainment, and its relationship with variety was organic. We know most of what we know about vaudeville because of the existence of variety, and if variety hadn't been there, it would be a much darker entertainment for us. It was covered in the newspapers, but sporadically and usually very briefly. Variety was the first to actually review shows and talk about what was being performed on the stages, but it was also the first to carry entertainment business news. So we know a lot about what was happening on the business side from the pages of Variety. Variety, not the magazine, but
Mhm.
Variety, which is what's really performed in vaudeville, and one has to distinguish those two, is a much older entertainment, dates back to the 1830s and 1840s, and it was performed in a number of different venues. And it would survive long after vaudeville disappeared. I think the 2 golden ages of variety were probably about 1905 to 1920, and then again in the 1960s and 70s when TV was full of variety shows. And so variety is much longer lasting. Vaudeville was really a business form that organized the variety show and presented in a different format. And so it is a diverse entertainment market. Vaudeville itself starts up in the 1880s because there is an effort across American cities to separate the bar rooms from the theaters. It's considered immoral to sit and drink and look at a show. And so municipal legislation is passed, and then state legislation is passed across the Northeast and gradually spreads its way west, which prohibits drinking and watching a show. And as that happens, enter and owners have to make a decision. Are they going to run a theater and get rid of the drinking, or are they going to stay with a bar room and get rid of the show? And those who made the decision to get rid of the bar room and keep the show needed a new name for what they were doing, and they latched on the name of vaudeville, which was a French name that had been used since the 1790s for a higher class of variety, and that's where vaudeville came from as a
Now,
term.
give us a sense of what it was like to go to a vaudeville show at a, say, a big house in New York.
Sure. Peanuts, not popcorn. Peanut was the thing of choice, and people would spit out the shells. So, one of the reasons vaudeville is so transformative is that it was the first effort to democratize, commercial leisure by making it accessible and by, making it inexpensive. So, early in the century, a vaudeville show, depending on if it was a small theater or a more prestigious theater, a more prestigious theater may cost you 50 cents, a less prestigious theater, a dime. By 1910, the more prestigious theaters are charging up to $2 for and they have reserved seating. The less prestigious have gone up to about 35 cents. So there is inflation in prices. House lights were left on so that the people on stage could see the audience, very clearly. There was a tradition of getting up and moving around during the show. You didn't sit quietly through the show. So a vaudeville show was made up of somewhere between 10 or 15 short acts that would last, some of them 10 minutes, some of them 20 minutes. And if an act was on that you didn't like, you could actually get up and leave and come back 20 minutes later. Reserve seating was quite a new thing. The best houses introduced reserved seating in the 1890s. It was pretty common among the better class of vaudeville theaters by 1910. The theater was quite segregated. If you were an African American, you could only sit up in the gallery, the top layer of the balcony. Children also sat there. Vaudeville was a place where parents would tell their kids to go after school if they were working late, and they would give them a dime to go and sit up in the balcony and stay in the theater for a couple of hours until they got home. There was a board next to the stage which announced the next act that would come out. It was all carefully timed because if you wanted to go out to the theater, you needed to know that at 8:10 the act you wanted to see was coming on. The business of organizing a vaudeville show, it was quite complicated because different acts used more or less of the stage. And so theater managers had to organize the show in such a way that they could close the curtains and put performers at the front of the stage while they were setting up the stage behind for the next act. And so singers and comics were always very popular because you could close the curtain behind them while you set up the stage for acrobats or for an animal act or for a short play.
Can you talk about the booking process? I know that in time that circuits developed, but in that 1905, in that right turn of the century, was it a very organized business?
Yes, it started in the earliest days of vaudeville, individual theaters booking their own, and performers would correspond with theater managers to say, I'm going to be in your area in 2 weeks' time. Have you got anything for me? And so it was a very complicated and hard to organize business. Already by the 1880s, various theaters are beginning to collaborate together because it doesn't take much to realize that if you can book somebody for 3 weeks and then put them on a circuit so that they would perform 1 week in one theater, then move to the next theater, and then move to a third theater. And if they were all close together, the performers would be more inclined to accept that than they would if you were just doing an individual booking. And so that's how the circuits started up.
If you're a vaudeville performer
Mhm.
in these days, will you
Mhm.
have multiple shows a day or is it pretty much one show a night?
Most theaters ran between 2 and 4 shows a day, depending on how long those shows are. Some of the smaller theaters would run 4 shows a day because they didn't have enough material. And after 1900 with short movies, so that you might have 5 or 6 acts, and in between those 5 or 6 acts, you'd show a couple of films.
What would, say, a star, maybe not a mega star, but an established vaudeville performer, what could they expect to make a week or a show?
Widely divergent. Now, this is a time when if you were a bank clerk, you'd probably be earning about 1,500 to 2,000 a year. If you were a factory laborer, you'd probably be earning about $1,000 a year. A big vaudeville star, the Annette Kellermans, the Eva Tanguays, they would be pulling in about 2,000 to 3,000 a week. And so it was huge salaries for the biggest stars. If you were starting out in pop vaudeville, small time, performing in between movies, you would probably get 15 to $25 a week. Most vaudevillians would perform maybe 20 weeks a year. So, but it still meant that if you were a big vaudeville star, you were 40, $50,000 a year in income at a time when a bank manager might be earning 5.
Who were some of the biggest vaudeville stars of the 1905, 1910s?
The biggest names around 1900 were men. George Fuller Golden, who was really the first stand-up comic, was the highest paid. vaudeville performer. Over the course of the first decade of the 20th century, they increasingly become women. And it's the women who earn the highest salaries. People like Eva Tanguay, who was for 4 or 5 years the highest paid performer in vaudeville. Annette Kellerman, she was a swimmer, an Australian who came and did a diving act. Harry Houdini was always a big draw. The young Buster Keaton was with the Keaton family on vaudeville.
Let me wrap up by asking you, I think I can guess what may have hastened the end of vaudeville as a dominant entertainment format. I'm guessing movies had something to do with it, radio had something to do with it, but tell me.
Basically competition. Vaudeville always operated on fairly tight margins so that you needed to fill your house to about half full in order to make any money. And as competition grew in the early 20th century, not just from movies, but also from cabarets that are growing up, clubs that are growing up, reviews and roof gardens like Ziegfeld's Roof Garden, burlesque, which is also cutting into the vaudeville market. So all of these different entertainments are starting to chip away at the money that you can make in entertainment. And vaudeville, in order to respond, they move towards consolidation by shutting down less profitable vaudeville houses and then investing heavily in building huge places like the Palace
Mm.
in New York, which were going to be opulent and which were very expensive to build. And there's a stock market crash, which wipes a lot of them out.
Professor Mono, thank you for helping shed some light on this and what the industry was like when we were born. Really appreciate your time and your expertise.
Thank you, Cynthia.
And now we'll hear from Peter Rader, the author and screenwriter. He wrote a terrific book a few years ago, Playing to the Gods, Sarah Bernhardt, Eleonora Duse, and the Rivalry That Changed Acting. This great book is about to be made into a movie directed by Michael Susi. Here, Rader talks about the entertainment marketplace in 1905 and how Sarah Bernhardt was the Taylor Swift of her day. Peter Rader, author and screenwriter, thank you so much for joining me.
You're so welcome. I'm thrilled to talk about this.
Peter, people seeking entertainment, what kind of options would have been available to people in New York circa 1905, the era when Variety got started?
1905 is a really interesting year because it's a year in which emergent technologies are about to revolutionize the world of entertainment. You have, on the one hand, the emergence of Nickelodeons in cities across America that were not quite movies yet, but shorts, but novelty shorts that people would go in and see for 5 cents. Things like magic tricks or a train coming into a station, or foreign capitals like Paris and London, or vaudeville. It would be a series of shorts. You're in and out in 20 minutes, and that was your movie experience of the day. And then, even more revolutionary was that entertainment had come into the home in the form of gramophone recordings. The gramophone is that big trumpet record player that you see on the RCA Victor logo, where you'd get your 78 RPM record. It wasn't vinyl quite yet, and you would crank up your thing. There was no electricity involved. It was all mechanical. Crank up your thing, it loads the spring, and this record spins for about 3 minutes, and suddenly opera is in your home. Certainly the most famous opera singer of the day was Enrico Caruso from Naples, Italy, who was like the Elvis Sinatra of his day. He was super popular. He was selling records at the time in the hundreds of thousands, soon to be millions. So he's on his way to become a platinum recording artist. And that's the technology that was about to disrupt the industry. But the legit theater, that's where you went out and saw things en masse. The grande dame of the theater at the time was Sarah Bernhardt. She was arguably, and to this day, the most famous actress that ever lived. Everyone knew Sarah Bernhardt. Whether you had seen her in person or not, you had read about her in the newspaper because she invented the culture of celebrity. But she was very canny. She was her own producer. She ran her own company. And she knew that the performance didn't end when the curtain went down. It continued after hours, the after party, the dinner party, and in the morning papers.
What put her on the path to becoming really the first entertainment star?
Sarah Bernhardt has such a fascinating biography. She was the illegitimate daughter of a courtesan who was essentially an escort, and a high-end courtesan who would be with kings and princes and very wealthy patrons. But she came into the world in Paris, France. She was French, and she absolutely became determined to seize her own destiny, and she did it relentlessly. She had so much charisma. The way she died on stage is legendary. She would take 2 minutes to fall, spiral down to the floor, shrieking. And in most of her plays, she did die. She often played tragic heroines who would die. But what really drove her success was that she realized at some point that she had so much fame, she actually could seize her own destiny by running her own company. That was unprecedented for a woman to be running her own company. But Sarah did it, and she did it brilliantly. She spent exorbitant amounts of money on costumes and the staging and the sets. I mean, she was always on the verge of bankruptcy, and she would always rebound.
How big of a troupe would she have typically traveled with in her heyday?
Sarah famously owned a train car. So she had the Sarah Bernhardt Express that she would hook on to, various trains and travel across the country. And it was pretty much full. So I would say her entourage was in the 30 to 50. Maybe a half dozen to a dozen of those would be actors. She also created this idea of merch. So one thing that she did was sell these souvenir collectibles called cabinet cards, which were photographs of Sarah Bernhardt doing eccentric, exotic things like sleeping in her signature coffin, which she liked to do, or wearing a bat hat, which was a hat with literally a taxidermied bat sitting on it, and various other things. She liked to dabble in the occult and do things like Ouija boards and stuff that was very popular in the time. So she played with all aspects of her personality to sort of magnetize and draw people in.
As you've said, this woman was so ahead of her time. She would have taken social media and she would just own the world today.
She was the prototype for people like, Liberace and Lady Gaga and David Bowie. The idea of be eccentric and out there. And that actually is fascinating to the public.
Peter, thank you for coming on and being a little part of Variety celebrating our pretty awesome 120th anniversary.
You're so welcome. Happy birthday, Variety. This was a lot of fun.
As we close out today's episode, we'll give the last word to Syme Silverman. This is an excerpt from the editorial that ran in the first issue under the masthead.
Variety, in its initial issue, desires to announce the policy governing the paper. We want you to read it. It will be interesting if for no other reason than that it will be conducted on original lines for a theatrical newspaper. The first, foremost, and extraordinary feature of it will be fairness. Whatever there is to be printed of interest to the professional world will be printed without regard to whose name is mentioned or the advertising columns. All the news all the time and absolutely fair are the watchwords. The news part of the paper will be given over to such items as may be obtained, and nothing will be suppressed, which is considered of interest. We promise you this and shall not deviate.
Thanks for listening. This episode was written and reported by me, Cynthia Littleton, with contributions from Clayton Davis, Syme Silverman, and generations of Variety reporters who have labored for the mighty V. What a history. I loved the interviews with David Mono and Peter Rader so much that longer versions of both will run on Friday on Daily Variety's sibling podcast, Strictly Business. Sticks, Nicks, Hick Picks. Please leave us a review at the podcast platform of your choice, and please tune in tomorrow for another episode of Daily Variety. And don't forget to tell us what you think at podcasts@variety.com. Thanks.
I'm just fascinated that Variety is 120 years old. That really rocked my world.